I'm the Tracksuit Professor, and welcome to the third video of the series Why Bother With Manele, a story about power, money, and enemies. We've seen that Manele, through not conforming to a certain ideology imposed on them by the West, actually opened cracks into the construction of that very ideology. This is what we call subversion. So, how can Manele be subversive then? We ask, what are the characteristics of Manele performances which enable them to contest deeply rooted assumptions about society and the self? Think about the following definition. To undermine is to weaken or cause to collapse by removing underlying support, as by digging away or eroding the foundation. In the light of this, we will argue that Manele opposed Western culture by challenging the very pillars it is built on. Horkheimer and Adorno state that these pillars are influenced by Enlightenment values: truth, law, reason, science, logic. The tools used by Manele to undermine these values are best described by De Certeau in his book The Practice of Everyday Life. He discusses how the everyman can find ways of making do in a system that doesn't provide for him. The author calls these means tactics and puts them in opposition with strategies, which are the modus operandi of the privileged few who can make the rules, like state institutions, the army, science labs, businesses. Strategies involve the definition of a proper space that establishes itself by eliminating the polluting factor. They have control over the space that's autonomous, governed by laws which they impose and enforce, punishing transgressions. Tactics, on the other hand, are the art of the weak, the powerless, and the other. They involve manipulating time and circumstances as they lack the power to create their own spaces. The weak subvert the established order through subtle alterations, unseen interventions, using deceit or stealth as their cover. Consider Manele pirate radio transmissions. Using a space which they have been banned from, they appear and disappear on different frequencies every evening, often interfering with other stations. This is a good example of how tactics operate. It is very important, though, to note that these tactics are part of an embodied knowledge. As we mentioned in the first video, it's a knowledge that does not know itself, and the subversion, if it happens, is not a result of an intentional process. Another tactic which finds its uses in Manele music is that of bricolage. The term is first introduced by anthropologist Levi-Strauss and defines a creative combinatory practice through which the agent, the bricoleur, uses an existing pool of heterogeneous resources that is limited in order to create something different. He has to make do with whatever he has at hand. In Manele, the tactic of bricolage can be found at the core of the musical composition, for example. First, the sound of Manele has borrowed elements from multiple genres, from traditional gypsy music to reggaeton and hip-hop. Second, the instruments used are a mix of traditional and new. So you would have the violin, the clarinet, the cymbal playing along an electronic synthesizer called orgue. And third, and most important, borrowing musical passages or whole instrumentations from famous songs is a common practice in the industry, one which has attracted much negative attention and plagiarism accusations. One infamous such example is this song. Here, Narcis uses Mozart's theme from Symphony No. 14 and improvises on it, resulting in the beautiful marriage between high and low culture. Could we go as far as to argue that the Manelist, unknowingly, gives a nod to the postmodern notion that everything has been done before, and the only viable option for the 21st century artist is to play around with what is already there and remix it? The Manelist takes ownership over someone else's song and reperforms his version of it, but is also ready to give up ownership of his work as well. One may find the same manna performed in several different versions to the point where the original author is unknown and at the same time unimportant. In Manele, originality and authenticity are perceived as relative and fluid, so the myth of the author god is under serious threat.
Corazón
that can be addressed when thinking about this notion of tactics is the use of language. De Certeau notes, everyday practice can be described as internal manipulations of a system, that of language, or that of an established order. Terms or tropes inscribe in ordinary language the ruses, displacements, ellipses, etc. that scientific reason has eliminated from operational discourses in order to constitute proper meanings. Let me explain. Manele used this kind of tropes. These are frowned upon by the academic elites that dismiss them as signs of an aggressive ignorance and lack of education. However, there are instances on which this manipulation of language happens. One example is the disregard for grammar rules or the use of slang words. Rhymes are often chosen based purely on their sonority and not on their meaning, which makes them quite absurd at times. Manele used metaphor extensively as a way to veil reality, most commonly to allude to illegal or sexual behavior. This self-censorship is a way in which language receives double meaning, appealing to both those who get it and to those who don't. Another level involves the use of onomatopoeia and body sounds that cannot be contained or expressed in words. This also contributes to fragmenting the language and placing the song outside intelligible discourse. Let's assume that postmodern thinkers are right, and everything is constructed through language. Then those who control language have the power. Is it therefore reasonable to argue that Manele undermined the authority of language, and with it the authority of the structures of power who exert their control through language? Now, we've addressed our first question of how Manele can be subversive through expanding our understanding of the use of tactics. We can focus on specific aspects of the Manele performance and the way in which these disrupt the values of the established order. For that purpose, I'd like to put forward that Manele shares certain characteristics with performances like the Carnival and the Greek tragedy. To be clear, we will specifically engage with Mikhail Bakhtin's take on Carnival and the ideas Friedrich Nietzsche expresses in The Birth of Tragedy. The first thing we need to bear in mind before we go into more detail is that the distinction Nietzsche makes between the Apollonian and the Dionysian. We will make use of this throughout our analysis. Nietzsche explains the two forces using the images of the two Greek gods. On one side we have Apollo, god of light and truth, and on the other Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy. The Apollonian is associated with beauty, perfection, dreamlike images, reason, visual representation, and the birth of the individual self. By contrast, the Dionysian stands for music, ritual, ecstasy, and the dissolution of the ego in communion with a primordial oneness. That is, the abandonment of oneself in the shared experience, giving birth to a new collective identity. In a way, these two aesthetic forces are similar to the Chinese yin-yang. Opposite but independent. Yin is the dark part, the negative, symbol of passivity, ambiguity and rest. Yang, the white part, is positive, its activity and brightness. One might be tempted then to assume that Manele are purely Dionysian. The ecstasy, rupture, liminality, communion and inebriation generated by the power of music are all present. On one hand, the Apollonian might be the artistic incarnation of the ruling principles of society, reason, law, truth, which, as Nietzsche argues, have primacy over Dionysian manifestations, suppressing them. In modernity, such harmony is disrupted by the preponderance of the Apollonian, reason, theory, individuality, self-knowledge, science, over the Dionysian, dissolution of self, music, non-representative arts, aesthetics. Individuation and its requirement of rationality have repressed sensibility and compartmentalized experience. Now, think back to how society responds to Manele, how they were banned and censored because they were considered primitive, uncivilized, low arts that promote debauchery. This is a valid way to look at the relationship between Apollonian and Dionysian, but doesn't really offer the whole picture. Nietzsche also argues that these two principles are in harmony in Greek tragedy. This is equally valid for Manele. While the Dionysian traits are easily apparent and will be discussed in more depth when we talk about the Carnival, the Apollonian might not be as visible to the naked eye. That's because we must think of the Apollonian in a different light. Sure, it is about perfection, truth and reason, about the measured restraint, that freedom from the wilder impulses, that calm wisdom, But as Nietzsche reminds us, it is all just a dream. And even in the most intense life of this dream reality, the sense of its status and appearance still shimmers through. The world of Apollo does not correspond to people's lived experience of reality. It is, despite its beauty and wholeness, merely a representation, an illusion. These ideas are at the core of Greek tragedy, evident through its use of myth as a basis for the plays. Because the horror of existence were too overbearing, the Greek made use of the gods and heroes of Olympus. They channeled their mythology to act as a symbolic screen, which offers them some access to their reality, while, through representation, protects them from it. The same can be said about Manele, as they build their own mythology, which is apparent both in the lyrics of the songs and in the behavior of Manelists, in and outside the live performance. In this mythology, the Manelist is a tragic hero. He has been endowed by the gods with superior cleverness, talent, value and power, although born poor most of the time, and his life journey, his combined native qualities rather than hard work, have brought him to where he is now, rich, happy and accomplished, on all levels. Of course, at the end of the day, he also gets the girl, or even the girls, who are often nothing more than beautiful objects of desire. But the tragedy of the Manelist is that he can never fully enjoy what he has, because of the vile world who tries to sabotage him at every step. Distrust is a common feeling. The women are two-faced and only want him for his money, his brothers betray him, and the enemies, these mythical creatures who are always being alluded to but never named, are jealous of the hero's assets. They lack the capability, though, to do any practical harm. Their threat is always there, though, looming over the protagonist's seemingly perfect life. Manelists are not necessarily believing this illusion that they are fabricating, but they prefer to adopt the fake it till you make it attitude. This is also apparent in Bakhtin's Carnival, where the emphasis is not on being, but on becoming. As Eliot notes, the image of becoming expresses hope for the future, which Bakhtin contrasts with the official preoccupation with the past that renders life predetermined and unchangeable. In Manele, this translates in the refusal to accept their present circumstances. This comes to undermine the fixed identity that seems to be imposed on them, that of deviant outcasts, poor, uneducated people, as we've discussed in one of the first videos. Scholars like Butler or Goffman have written about the concept of performative identity, constantly produced through our actions and behaviors, which links back to Althusser's view of ideology, which we analyzed previously. Manelists are trapped between the identity they perform and the stigma attached to their bodies. Still, their stubbornness to persist in fabricating their own representations, which contrasts with their social background, is something worth exploring further. Through the privilege that they accord to simulation and dissimulation, Manele resemble a bit folk tales. Russian anthropologist Vladimir Prop talks about folk tales as a form where relationships of power are reversed. A utopian space is created where the unfortunate are victorious, protecting them from the reality of the established order. To create this utopian world where the underdogs, the weak, thrive against all odds, certain tactics are apparent in Manele. One of them would be the illusion of power, which is attempted through sound and through image. First, sound-wise, live performances of Manele amplify, thicken and multiply the voice and the instruments. They're characterized by their loudness and their length. They can go on to last for hours of uninterrupted play. Amplification and the use of an electronic echo effect cancel the natural reverberation of the room, enabling the spectator to enter a space of a different, greater dimension generated by the music. As ethnomusicologist Victor Stoichidze explains, the sonic and textual universe constructed by music thus permeates the whole place and enters through the whole body. And indeed, despite it being merely a beautiful crafted illusion, its effects are as real as they come. People who witness Manele performances admitted that usually a good performance leaves them broken, shattered and drained. This is the kind of overwhelming impact that it has on its audience. Now, talking about the image. When we talk about it in Manele, what we often remark is the appropriation of Western symbols of wealth and status. For example, suits and designer clothes or counterfeit copies of them, mostly following Italian fashion, Flamboyant ornate dresses, jewelry, gold being the favorite metal, luxury cars with a preference for Mercedes, and palace-like mansions with patios and lion statues guarding the entrances. Have a look at this following example from a Roma wedding in Hunedoara and see how many of these you can spot. What this kind of appropriation does is it displaces the meaning imbued in certain goods by those who produce them. Isn't this the whole principle of consumerism? That buying enough of the right products can help you become part of a certain group or attain certain characteristics? But in Manele, it's not the case of simple consumption, as these goods are used in improper ways, creating a new stage of production and causing different meanings or associations to emerge. One such improper use is the too-muchness of it all, kitsch, over-the-top abundance. Another, the inability to manage the civilizing force of luxury and repress their primal impulses, is supported by an urban legend of wealthy Manelists keeping their horses in the rooms of their palaces while they sleep in tents in the patio. And of course, only a small proportion of Manelists are actually rich. Those who organize the big parties and sumptuous events, the patrons, if you wish, who hire the singers, are mostly mafia bosses or local figures who made money in dodgy circumstances. The rest, though, are mainly poor people whose appropriation of symbols of wealth is aspirational and has no sound material basis. Another urban legend goes as far as to say that some people starve themselves in order to be able to buy that dream car that will get them to feel and be seen as rich. There is a reason why I'm sharing these stories that go around, although I could blatantly dismiss them as stereotyping, but they do prove a certain attitude and response of society towards the Manelist displays of symbols of power. We are not buying it. If they do lack the financial backing to sustain the illusion, we will just unmask them. If they do have the financial backing, we will dismiss it because we devalue their wealth. It's dirty money, as they're not supposed to be rich. We are yet again confronted with this discrepancy created between a person's true identity, whatever that might mean, and what they are performing. It cannot be dismissed as hypocrisy, as it seems to be a genuinely embodied attitude. So, can we argue then that because of our distrust, that the way Manelists present themselves and behave in the world is reflecting of their true nature, we are opening up the problem of representation for ourselves as well. Specifically, the fact that visual representation might just be symbolic and not point to an underlying truth or unchangeable essence of that person. I'll leave you with that for now.